antecedent analysis, we're also going to use in-depth interview, the personal interview, because we feel it is important to interview some persons that are close to the election campaign, particularly the campaign officers of different communication officers rather of different political parties, and then some top journalists that will help us to understand better. Next slide. Next. Now, so far we've been able to, our research is still ongoing, but we're just reporting the preliminary findings. And one of the preliminary findings is that just like we had in the past, the coverage centered essentially on horse race and strategy, again, ignoring issue-based campaign or issue-based, content. So many intra-party wrangling. For instance, in PDP, for instance, the case between Wike and Atiku dominated most of the narrative about PDP and all that. So most of the things that were reported about them was about, who is going to blink first and who is going to do that. And then we saw the emergence of the five G5 governors, the integrity governors, so-called governors, integrity governors. So all of them, contributed, to distracting the media from, focusing on the issues that really matter more importantly to us. And then we also noticed the evidence of media capture in the tone of coverage, particularly after the sanctions. During that period of the presidential election campaign, the NBA, for instance, was so much interested in sanctioning some media organizations such as Channels Television, Arise Television, and others who may have, aid broadcast something that is not in line with their guideline. But that was also largely interpreted as political witch hunting, where some persons felt maybe the opposition or the main party was using the NBA or rather the MDC to fight any media that is not giving it all the necessary attention. Next slide. In summary, like I have said earlier, the focus of the coverage on horse race is not different from what we've had in the past. It is in fact the same thing as what we have always seen in the past election campaigns. And then the three major political parties, all of them enjoying sustained coverage. It was also obvious that media capture, dominated, or sorry, it's not dominated, but at least we could notice in the tone of coverage how some stories were framed or some stories were covered in order not to kind of annoy the powers that be or the ruling party. And then issue-based campaign again was relegated to the background like we've seen in the past. Next. Based on the foregoing, we therefore recommend that newspapers should improve on issue-based reporting because this would help, to kind of win voters or direct the voters who rely on them, on the media to do what, to get updates on the right information for the election. And then we also argue that the use of sanctions by government as a means of media capture should be checkmated. This is not clear it's going to be done, but we feel it is one of the ways to kind of, wriggle the media out of direct media influence. And then newspapers should also review their approach to presidential election coverage in order to right the wrongs of the past mistakes. Thank you so much for your time. I believe I didn't go beyond the time given to me.
Thank you. Thank you, Jude. You did an excellent job. And that was quite an interesting presentation. I expect robust discussions to come from it. Okay, so next we have Professor Ladi Adamu here with us. If she's not here, we'll go on to Professor Rotimi Olatunji, Professor Rotimi, are you ready?
Yes, I am ready.
Okay, then. So I will pull up your slide. Professor Rotimi Olatunji Sari is representing the print and broadcast media team. He is a public relations professor at Lagos State University. So I will pull up your slide and we'll get going. So let's share. And let me know when to move on to the next one just by saying next.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon from Lagos here in Nigeria. My name is Rotimi Olatunji, and together with my team, we have been working on the mixed method study of Nigeria's 2023 presidential election campaign. And our focus is analysis of uses of print and broadcast advertisements during the 2023 presidential election campaigns. So let's have the next slide. The next slide, please. Well, this is a multidisciplinary team, and it's also a pan-Nigerian team because we have drawn our participants from several universities with the names indicated, and I will not want to waste time by listing the names, but we have team members from the Lagos State University, Bayero State University. We have also the Advertising Regulatory Council of Nigeria represented. We have Crescent University and different classification of scholars, both senior professors, senior lecturers, and PhD candidates in their respective institutions. So this is the theme, and then we have opportunity. We've been working together online and offline. Please go to the next slide. Now, this slide simply summarizes the state of our research so far. And so what we're trying to say here is that we are using mixed method research to investigate different uses of advertising in the presidential election. The newspapers to be selected are listed, and then the tentative findings are also listed, which is that when we did not see much of usage of advertisements, particularly print advertisements in the 2023 presidential election, and that has implications for the study and several other uses of the media. Let's go to the next slide. Well, the introduction. In this particular research, we're focusing on the 4 leading political parties, namely the APC, the PDP, the Labour Party, and NNPP. Historically, you will see that at the colonial and pre-colonial era, newspapers have been very critical in shaping elections and democratic practices in the country. And the same thing happens to advertisements during previous elections, even in the pre-independence election, where we had notable political parties like the Northern People's Congress, the NCNC Action Group, NEPU. Each of them, to an extent, use advertisements, but not as elaborately as we have today. The same trend continued during the Second Republic, where we had MPN, MPP, UPN, GNPP, and PRP. That period was dominated largely by regionalism and regional politics, but they were also very active in the use of advertisements. Now, we now had the aborted Third Republic, when we had 2 dominant political parties, the NRC, SDP, and this cut across different ethnicity, religious group, and so on. Of course, military truncated that era, but the SDP and the NRC, they utilized print advertisement extensively during that time. Enter the Fourth Republic, the current one, since 1999 up to now. And what we have seen is that in previous elections, most dominant parties, most parties that had won election, had the tendency of sponsoring more advertisements than those that had lost election. We saw that in 1999, PDP had having more advertisements than the UPN, and we also saw that in subsequent elections until 2015 when the narrative changed. And then, but in 2015, what we saw was that the APC then used more of radio commercials than print. PDP used more of print than APC at the time. But that was the historical background. Let's go to the next slide. Now, what is unique about this 2023 presidential election? My predecessor has spoken about the 4-horse race that's unlike the others when there were two dominant parties. But beyond that, we also had incidences of opinion polls that were meant to shape the trajectory of the election and the results therefrom. Well, what we saw after all of the electioneering was that opinion polls, although they were critical, but they didn't work out as predicted by the witch doctors. And so we also have former trends of ethno-religious cleavages in the system. That was the background to 2023 presidential election. Let's go on. Next slide, please. Thank you. Now, what is the problem? Increasingly and globally too, the role of the legacy media has been declining tremendously. And by this, we will include the print media, the broadcast media, in terms of even revenue and and so on. We have been seeing consistent decline in the readership of newspapers, in the revenue of newspapers, compared to the other emerging media, social media, and so on. And so the problem with this study is that, do we still have print media dominant in the presidential election in the view of the emerging media? How dominant are influence on the voting behaviors of the electorate and the final outcome? Next slide, please. Well, we're using mixed methods, quantitative and qualitative content analysis. Along the line, we have added key informant interview because we have discovered that we cannot investigate extensively based on just the ontology of philosophical perspective. We need epistemology and we need to do constructivist approach. So we are adding interview of key informants to be able to get rich data for analysis. Next slide, please. Okay, now tentative findings. We call it work in progress because we have not been able to extensively analyze the contents of newspaper advertisements in terms of the objectives of the research. We've started with the month of November when electioneering campaign started. But interestingly or surprisingly too, we have seen that there was low usage of newspaper advertisement. For example, for the month of November, as far as the Punch newspaper was concerned, in the constructed weeks, we just saw that there was just one advertisement that was sponsored by the APC. Even that had no issue embedded in it. It just announced the date of presidential rally that was to take place in Lagos State. The same thing was repeated by the Nation newspaper of 24th of November, 2022, also announcing presidential rally. The other parties did not have any showing as far as the month of November was concerned, based on the two newspapers we had completed doing the analysis. So that convinced us that we need to go beyond the constructed week with weeks. We want to take the whole months of November, December, January, February, as we go on with the research. But so far, this has shown little showing for the all the political parties and also APC. And of course, this should not be surprising because in past elections, when the electioneering campaign starts, there is usually low usage. But as the election go on, campaigns go on, there is increasing usage. We want to see how this increasing usage plays out. So next slide, please. Okay. Tentative results on fettered advertisement. What we have done here was to go to the back end of the data by contacting ACON, Advertising Regulatory Council, to collect the sampled, collect totality of advertisement that were vetted. This is against the backdrop of ethical issues in advertising, where the political parties exposing without vetting. And so this is the picture we have seen so far, with APC having more advertisement, both print and broadcast, as well as outdoor, more vetted than the other political parties. Next slide. Next slide, please. Okay. What about main issues that are dominant in the copies that were vetted? We can see that APC, because it had the largest number of copies vetted, talk about issues of Hope 2023, which is the campaign slogan, nationalism, continuity of government, and national unity and economy. Of course, this is in agreement with previous studies that try to show that a ruling party will portray more of his past programs and continuity than those who are contending with him. And so PDP threw up issues the same thing for Labour Party, talking about need for positive change, patriotism, take back your country, and all of that. Of course, the MPP talk about personality. They focus more on the Thank you. Next slide. Okay, now, as I try to wind up, what are the summary of our findings? One, there was very sparse usage of press advertisements. Of course, we have collected the TV commercials and radio jingles as far as the electioneering campaign were concerned, but we are still doing analysis, content analysis of these jingles. But so far, there is sparse usage of press advertisement by the political parties. Secondly, APC submitted more of parts to ACON for vetting than the others. Of course, by the time we complete this research, we want to see whether the ones that were published were even as equal as the ones that were vetted. Thirdly, was that APC emphasized continuity and a renewed hope, taken as an offshoot of Hope 1993. Of PDP poses as the party waiting to replace the ruling APC. Maybe that was a psychological predisposition, but whether it played out at the end of the day is another one. Then the emergence of LP is very critical because it was a third force that was really very powerful. And we are not surprised that each of the parties, three major parties, won 12 states apiece. The APC was only able to carry the day because of spread and the totality of his votes compared to others. And so this tended to show the relative popularities of the three leading political parties. Of course, NNPP was only dominant in Kano, which is why we have only the personality of the candidate being exposed. Now, was there a relationship between usage of advertisement and the outcome? Research literature shows that there is no relationship as such between exposure of print advertisement and outcome. But we have seen consistently in Nigeria, the parties that advertised more tended to carry the day. We saw that for PDP in 1999, between 1999 and 2014. Well, this also has played out in 2019 and 2023. So did newspaper advertisement or advertisement influence? We cannot conclusively state that they do influence, but we can see that parties with bigger purses tended to advertise more, and that could have given them advantage of spread. Other factors are important, particularly informal levels of communication. And then now the emergence of new media could be very critical. Now, one scholar in advertising said, half of the advertising budget is a waste. But the problem is that we don't know which is that half that is wasted. That is why, even when we cannot measure the relevance of advertisement exposure to outcome, what the political party gladiators we always want to do is they want to be noticed, to be among the big players. So they will continue to advertise even when they don't know the relevance of the advertisement to winning the campaign. So far, these are the tentative findings for the research. We are still continuing to do other layers of analysis, and we hope to come up with such findings. I want to submit that we need the ontological as well as epistemological, philosophical standpoint to be able to actually have a greater understanding of the influences of commercials on outcome of the election. That's why we will be interviewing key players as well as industry leaders to see their perspective to the issue. I want to thank you for this opportunity, the coordinator. So that's the end of it.
Thank you very much. That was quite interesting. I'd like to invite Mope. Mope, are you there?
Yes,
Mope
is here, yes.
Okay, so I'll hand off to you to take over at this point, and then I'll hop back on.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And of course, to our presenters, thank you for that insightful presentation or those insightful presentations. I want to call on Chioma Eze for her own take on these presentations. And of course, after that, Ekaite George will be giving hers before we not take questions from our participants here on site.
Okay.
Over to you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. I think it's already a very interesting conference so far, listening to the last presentation. I was just about to go through the recommendations, and I found it interesting that we are still not able to establish the relevance of ads for political parties, and yet they continue to advertise. That's a good thing, really. But then when you look at the data on the fact that the APC is the only one that they vet more, noticing that certain political parties actually are very deliberate that way, to that extent, and research exposing that's also, I find it very interesting as well. And then that the research was thorough enough to go at the back end to check to know that people actually, whether political parties are vetting or not with ACON. I like that extent as well. And I find it very interesting, especially because I'm about to do a walk around political reporting, and it's, I find it interesting, really.
All right. Thank you very much for that. Okay, Ekaite George is not ready. If you have anyone on site that has one or two questions or comments concerning the presentation, I mean, this is about the election that we're still into that. The presidential panel is still on, of course, because of the outcome of the election, trying to, of course, ensure that all parties are with the results. So I think Dr. Bassi has a question. So Dr. Bassi will be joining me shortly for his own comments, questions.
Thank you very much for that work. My comments are this. One, I observed that the station you used, the electronic media you used, TVC, is owned by one of the contestants, and you can see that the adverts were mainly, the higher percentage came from that same party, one of the parties, because of the owner. And naturally, you know, the media, as we know, whoever pays sometimes depicts how stories are carried. And secondly, what you said about the newspaper. One of them again, the Nation notice owned by one of the same contestants. And again, maybe depending on the parameters you used in selecting the newspapers and perhaps the electronic media, you will see that we have AIT, you see they carry some stories. And there were adverts carried by AIT channels as well as NTA. I don't know the rationale for just relying on TVC, or as you said, within the period of the research, maybe that is when you had just those advertisements. Maybe we'll take a second look at it, because these things may have a way of impacting the final outcome. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Bassi. They will respond to your queries.
Hello.
Get all the
Hello.
Hello. Okay. We'll get all the questions, and of course, they will respond. Do we have any other question from the participants? Now we don't have. I will now go back to Professor Mba in case we have from the virtual participants.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Bassi. Taking a look at the question here, and I don't see any questions, and I don't see any hands up. So at this point, I will invite first Jude Ogbodo, and then Professor Olatunji to respond to Chioma's comments and Dr. Bassi's comments. Jude?
Yes, please.
Do you have anything to, any response to their comments?
Oh, I think the questions were directed to Professor Olatunji on advertisement from a TVC, and sure I'm in the right position to comment on that. Professor Mbaka, sorry, Professor Olatunji can comment on that.
Thank you. And Professor Olatunji, are you still here?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, take it away then.
Thank you. I like to appreciate Dr. Bassi for his observation and the comments by the two distinguished ladies on the presentations. Talking about Dr. Bassi's observation, let me first of all remind Dr. Bassi that we are yet to present data on the television commercials. And so the observation with regards to relying on TVC, which obviously is owned by one of the candidates, now President-elect Tinubu, that comment may not arise at this point. We have not yet gone to the analysis of the broadcast commercials of the different political parties. Secondly, the reference to the Nation and the Punch newspapers, why it may be valid, and it is valid that Tinubu owns TVC, but what we have done so far is not even to look at the content, the slangs, the language, and all of that of the particular advertisement that was advertised or that was published. What we have done so far is frequency, and we tackled the issue of frequency from two perspectives. One, the quantum of advertisements that were submitted by the parties for vetting to the Advertising Regulatory Council of Nigeria. Based on that wealth of data, what we had reported is that the APC submitted, obviously, more advertisements to the ACON than all the other parties. And if submission is an item to be considered, it means that they submitted and they are exposed. So we may just say that they tended to have exposed more than all the other parties put together. Of course, there could be explanations for that. And the ones that were submitted to ACON may not be limited to a particular medium or media vehicles. It may just be suitable for placement in all the other newspapers. And for this study, we're looking at around 6 or 7 newspapers. We have just looked at 1 month, the month of November, and we established that only the APC advertisement was noticed at the commencement of the electioneering campaign. As we go into further analysis, we will now begin to unearth issues and advertisements that were not just vetted, but were publicized or exposed by all the other parties. And so we may not for now be able to reach a conclusion on the number of advertisements that were exposed, because in 2015 and 2017, we saw unethical practices. Many of the political parties, they exposed their commercials without vetting. Are we going to see this one replicated in the present study? Possibly we may, possibly we may not on any offender than it used to be, because in the past, political parties, we put down a penalty of like 500,000, and they say if they penalize you, media could just take that kind of money. But now they have increased the rate of their punishment. But are we going to see each of the parties publish more than they expose, more than they were vetted? The research will answer this at the end of the day. So I want to thank Dr. Bassi for that, that observation. And I want to assure that we will put that at the back of our mind as we begin to analyze. We have Vanguard newspaper, we have This Day, we have other newspapers from other parts of the country. The Sun newspaper is also there. Of course, Sun is owned by somebody who was also in the APC, but we want to see how all of these newspapers and the different media, television and radio expose the advertisements during the particular time. Thank you so much. I hope I've tried to scratch the wound at the surface as far as your question is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm finding this really exciting. We have one more question for you, so not so fast. Right. Henry Wanguma, would you like to turn on your mic and ask your question? Are you able to? Unmute? I think he disappeared. Okay, so this is Henry's question. What informed your choice of the 8 journals chosen?
Okay, can I just address that straight away? The research group as a whole, whether you are working on print, whether you are working on newspaper, on public relations, on advertising, or other media platforms, we all agreed on the newspapers to be used objectively. So what obtains for advertising, obtains for print, use of print, obtains for use of public relations materials in the press. So it was not an eclectic decision. It was an agreement between the research team nationally to use those available newspapers, particularly the ones that have national orientation. The dimension that my team is going to add is that rather than limiting to constructed copies and weeks, we want to now adopt the totality of Punch, Vanguard, Guardian, This Day, Sun. We want to look at each of them month by month so that we will not escape any mention of any of the advertisements by any of the political party. Of course, sampling is good, but we want to now use sensors as a sampling device so that we'll be able to capture the frequency of exposure of advertisement during the time of study. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Say you did justice to those questions. And so we'll move on to, we don't have any more questions from our virtual participants. So we'll move on to our second group of presenters. I'd like to invite at this time